Howdy, you're listening to Wild West Filmmaking, exploring the outlaw way of indie film. Raw stories and real lessons from the frontier. Hosted by yours truly, Josh David Jordan. Howdy, y'all. I'm Josh David Jordan. I'm the filmmaker behind Tonto Por Cristo. As most of you know, I am not a theologian, but I do care deeply about telling stories that speak to the soul. And today I have the gift of sitting down with two people whose work have helped shape how a lot of folks experience beauty, reverence, and wonder in life through their words, architecture, and or tradition. Now, this is not scripted. I do have notes, so if you hear some ruffling around, it's me because I'm all over the place all the time, and that's just how things work for me. But they all come together, glory to God, in the end. So I'm just here to learn, and before we dive into the movie and y'all's comments, I'd love for each of you to introduce yourselves in your own words and just talk about what you do.
I'll go first because I'm wordy. I am Frederica Mathewes-Green. It's great to see you again, Josh.
Likewise.
I'm a writer, and I've written, I think, 11 books so far. I kind of lose track sometimes, and I do a lot of public speaking. So, yeah, that's me, Frederica Mathewes-Green. It's all one long name.
Yes.
I'm Andrew Gould. I design traditional buildings, mostly Orthodox churches. My company is New World Byzantine, and I consider myself to have a particular specialty in what you might call the acculturation of Orthodoxy into America. That is to say, how do we make Eastern Orthodoxy become natural for us Americans? And I was very excited to see your movie for that reason, because your movie is portraying Orthodoxy completely embedded into America in a natural way. I think more so than anything I've ever seen on screen.
Oh, wow. That really means that means a lot. Okay, yeah, let's just start with a little bit of where you're coming from. We talked about what kind of work you do. How does this intersect with beauty, sacredness, or storytelling in your world? I mean, I know how it does, but I would like to hear it coming from you guys.
I would say that I only recently realized that storytelling is so much a part of my writing, and that almost anything I've written about, I do it through imagining characters, and people seem to find that approachable. When we were chrismated in 1993, basically the only book out there was Metropolitan Callistos' The Orthodox Church. My husband loved it. He ate it up. This is so great. And he gave it to me. And I didn't finish reading it for about 15 years. That was this tiny print in here. So I try to write the books that I wish I could have read back then. I have that in mind for write the books where you really don't know that much and it's confusing and you're not sure you actually like it that much, and just try to draw them in. I was kind of shocked to realize my very first book was a book about real choices, listening to women, giving alternatives to abortion. So that was before my Orthodox life. And even in there, it's all storytelling. I just have 50 different post-abortion women telling their stories. So I really believe in that, the power of storytelling. I'm sorry, Andrew, we kind of ran away. We both tell stories. So how do you tell stories in architecture?
Well, there are stories in architecture. Often a design project requires a story to drive the design decisions, a self-imposed constraint, as it were. So when I'm confronted with designing an Orthodox church in an American state, for instance, I will often create an imaginary history to drive that project, because, when I designed my church here in Charleston, for instance, Charleston, South Carolina, there weren't any historic churches, Orthodox churches here in Charleston, but there were historic churches of various other denominations here. We have 19th century churches from the French Huguenots, for instance, synagogues, and these different religious groups built their historic buildings back then in styles that were meaningful to them culturally, that sort of have one foot in the old world history of that group, but also have one foot in what was normative in 19th century America. So I wanted to design our Orthodox church here to look like it belonged here. So I kind of created an imaginary history of supposing there had been Russian immigrants in the mid-19th century in Charleston who had built a Russian Orthodox church. It didn't happen. It might have happened. That happened in New York and San Francisco. It didn't happen here. But supposing it had, what would it have looked like? So I looked at what was fashionable in Russia at that time, what was going on in Charleston at that time, and I imagined what would that building look like, and I designed our church accordingly, and it worked really well because people see our church and they're sure it's a 19th century building. It has that feel of cultural richness and authenticity that you normally only see in old buildings, and it's the story that drives that in large part.
I would say the name of the church is Holy Ascension. It's OCA, and it's right outside Charleston. It's in the town of Mount Pleasant. And something that Andrew said when they were still in the process of building, that I was like, well, of course that's true. He said the form of it would be what they loved at home, and it would be what they see as giving glory to God. So kind of the shape of it is given, but wherever you're building a church, you have to use local materials. So it would be stucco, it would be knotty pine, it would be iron, there would be iron door pulls, all of those things. It's a beautiful thing to think about, because wherever you go, you see a historic church. These are the things they had in their hands and in their neighborhood, and they were able to bring to this building in order to construct it. And separating the materials from the form was very eye-opening, and made it a much more tender feeling toward this church.
Well, one thing I always say about Orthodox liturgical arts is, if you look at all the different Orthodox traditions and heritage across the old world countries, you see certain things that are the same everywhere. That's what you might call the things that are canonical to Orthodoxy, the things that kind of nobody ever decided to change over place and over the centuries. But then most of what you see in Old World Orthodoxy is stuff that's kind of culturally specific to this country versus that country, or it's culturally specific to the Baroque period versus the medieval period. These are the cultural traditions that you might call non-canonical. And so when I design Orthodox churches here, I'm very cognizant of that there's certain parts of Orthodox heritage that I kind of need to stick to, and there's other parts of Orthodox heritage that are kind of culturally specific and free for me to adapt to America. It's true in how people paint icons also. Any given typology of Orthodox icon, there's going to be certain things about it that are the same in all of the historical icons, and there's other things that vary in time and place, that the artist has artistic freedom to make his own. I felt this way looking at your movie. I'm sure you thought about this when you were making your movie, that, it presents Orthodoxy in a way that, like, the canonical stuff, like the order of the services and the characteristics of sainthood, the qualities of the fool for Christ, these things that are kind of universal in Orthodoxy, you stuck to those narratives in a way that kept them very recognizable to any Orthodox person who might watch the movie. But then there's 1,000 things that were just completely Texan, that would look totally exotic to a Russian or a Greek, for instance. And I think you really hit that balance beautifully of the canonical and the non-canonical traditions.
Yeah, you said something. You said when you were designing the architecture of the church that there wasn't really anything for you to look to, so you created a story. Was there ever in both of you, Frederica, when you're writing, because you're writing from your point of view as an American in a new Orthodox world, so for me to pull the curtain back, it really was one of the hard parts of making the film was I was like, am I Orthodox enough to be telling this tale? Did you ever have imposter syndrome when you're writing or when you're designing, as in like there's nothing to, it's almost, this is a new thing. It's a new thing that we're doing. It's like in the superheroes, they say, well, with great power comes great responsibility. And I do feel like there was a lot of pressure, and it was probably just self-imposed pressure and it has to start somewhere, right? There hasn't been an Orthodox film that I know of like El Tonto Por Cristo. There's Ostroff, and it's the Russian, and then we have Man of God, it's Greek, and then you have Andrei Rublev, which is very inspiring to me, and that's people who are cradle Orthodox, and that was made in the 60s. Was there ever a moment, maybe not, that you guys had any type of imposter syndrome, and maybe that's not the right word, but just a little bit of self-doubt, saying like, should I be the one doing this? I'm just curious from both of y'all's aspects.
I can say briefly that there were plenty of times that I worried that I didn't know enough and that I was drawing wrong inferences or putting things together the wrong way. So for all my early career, I just sought out Orthodox priests and people that had been in the church a lot longer and asked them to read it ahead of time. I was really looking for correction and advice. I didn't want to make a fool of myself. And for one example, one of the most popular things I've ever written is that little brochure that's put out by Ancient Faith of 12 things I wish I'd known before my first visit to an Orthodox church. One of the 12 things has to do with Mary and praying to Mary, and Protestants get offended at that, and they try to explain it. My problem was I headed it with the name of there was a popular song, might have been 30s, I'm Just Wild About Harry. And so I called it I'm Just Wild About Mary. And the people at Conciliar Press said, nope, it is not respectful enough. We really should not speak that way about her. I think that's a judgment call, but I was grateful. I would rather change something and not offend anybody than leave it the same and offend a small proportion. I want people to see through what I write to the beauty of the church and the beauty of the Lord. So I don't want to put in any stumbling blocks.
Andrew.
Well, there's an interesting contrast between what Frederica does and what I do, in that the modern Orthodox Church tends to have very high standards when it comes to the written word, maybe even higher standards than it was historically, because our priests are university seminary educated now, which was not always the case historically. And so we have really high standards of dogmatic correctness in our sermons and in our theological books that are published nowadays. So the realm in which Frederica works, one expects things to be scrupulously well edited and correct in the published word. On the other hand, the modern Orthodox Church, over the course of the 19th and 20th century, has reached a nadir in the visual arts. So by the mid 20th century, like canonical iconography had been almost completely forgotten. Church architecture had been almost completely captured by modernists and incompetents, and most of the visual stuff of Orthodoxy, frankly, looks pretty awful in the 1960s and 70s. It's gradually getting better. But, the Orthodox seminaries do not train architects. So there's very few people who do what I do, of trying to make churches look better. So I kind of came into Orthodoxy as a convert from the outside, saying, I'd really admire the good intentions of the Orthodox Church, the way they talk about beauty and liturgical art, but I can see that the actual reality of liturgical art right now is pretty broken, and I had high confidence coming from the Anglican Church, where liturgical arts are in much better shape, that I had a lot of talents and insights that I could offer to the Orthodox Church that were rather urgently needed. I've kind of driven ahead with my work, maybe somewhat recklessly, somewhat boldly. Not every last person likes what I do, but for the most part, the Orthodox Church has reacted quite well to it.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I feel the same way when it came to how I approach cinema in a way. It's a lot of, I don't really ask permission. I maybe ask for forgiveness later on down the road. But I think that's the thing, is people do want originality. People do want forward thinking, and they want beauty. And sometimes you have to go off the beaten path to do those things and not follow the norm. The El Tonto Por Cristo is not the norm. When we were first, concepting the film, it was going to be in black and white. It was going to be shot in 1:6:1, which is a European cinematic ratio, and a lot of one takes. And I remember a lot of the producers or investors or financiers were like, but you're still going to shoot it in color, right? So we can, it was almost like, when this fails, we can have it in color and do what we need to do to please an audience that's used to American style cinema. And I was like, no, we're going to stick to this. And it's always doing something new and doing something different. People don't really understand it, but what I think is, once you've passed that marker, it becomes synonymous with that style, because it's like, I always say there's a band called the Flaming Lips. It's one of my favorite bands. They've been around for like 35 years, and what a horrible name for a band, but I couldn't think of another name for that band and how they portray themselves. It just becomes the norm, and somebody has to start it. And so I know both of you are the same way. So I have a couple notes here. It says, so we made El Tonto Por Cristo. I wasn't trying to explain anything, really. I was just trying to hold space, a space for quietness, space for the absurd, space for the sacred. It's a black and white film about a fool for Christ who lives in a constant repentance and maybe takes on the suffering of others. But I would like to hear from y'all, when you watched it, what was the first thing that kind of surfaced for you? I know, Frederica, you've seen it twice, and Andrew, you've seen it once, but what was the first thing? It's a lot to take in as well. So what was the first thing that sort of surfaced for you when you first watched El Tonto?
For me, I was surprised at how accessible it is, because I knew it was going to be black and white art film, and I thought it might just be long takes of staring at a drinking glass or something. Just not really a movie you can get into, but which you can admire extravagantly, but not enjoy. And so it was refreshing to me as I came to see the characters, see little moments of humor. The fact that it's in so many chapters, I think, is also, that's good for people to know. That it's a story of a man and his community, and it's told in brief chapters. If you know that, you're not as daunted by, when it begins and it's all V&W, and you think this is going to be, like, Swedish art film of the 1950s. It's a very watchable movie. So that was a surprise to me, and of course one that I liked very much.
I really enjoyed the austere aesthetic. Not merely that it was in black and white, but the austere old house that they use as the monastery, the sort of scrubby, austere landscape that they're outside working in, the sort of the very bright outdoor light. All of this is so evocative of the American West.
The clothesline, I haven't seen a clothesline for 40 years. That was nice. The wind and the robes kind of flapping in the wind. That was very evocative.
Yeah, there's a definite Americana in every single scene, which I really appreciated. I think if the movie had not taken place in an old wooden farmhouse like that, it wouldn't have had that cultural richness to it. I was most surprised by how funny the movie is. I was laughing out loud all through the movie, and I didn't expect that of that movie. It was very refreshing. I've spent enough time with monks in monasteries to not take them too seriously, and to get a lot of those jokes about monasteries have this paradox where they're very serious places where people do the most serious, way of life. But on the other hand, monks ideally are like children and find joy and laughter in everything. And so there's a social tension constantly in monasteries that can result in any little thing being either scandalous or hilarious, depending on your point of view. And often the same little foible, one person in the room will think it's scandalous and the other person in the room will think it's hilarious, and that just makes it even more funny. And that was all through your movie, which I really enjoyed.
Yes, very true. That was leavening, and that the first few times where you find something humorous to engage with, it's like I trusted the movie more. It's like it's trustworthy. I can fully walk into this and not be afraid that it's going to just confuse me or, be staring at something for a long time and I don't know why. It was a very accessible movie. Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think the lens in which I see life is often hilarious, and nothing is more beautiful, I think, than laughter and the absurd. I say, it's not that it's easy to make someone cry in a drama, but I think it's difficult to make the human spirit laugh, and to find humor, is to find innocence and purity. And I wanted to make sure that, we take ourselves too seriously sometimes as humans, or maybe as Orthodox, which is, you walk in, there's a lot of piety, but there's also, I think some of my favorite priests are the most funniest. And there's a bit of just that humanity that surfaces. And also, making the film black and white, I was wanting to paint myself in a corner, and I've talked to you about this, Frederica, which is, the iconography and cathedrals and chapels. They're so beautiful with the architecture and the gold and all the colors. And for me, you're missing the different sounds, the hustle and bustle, the crying of children knocking their head on the floor and crying, and there's the smell of the beeswax candles in the ends. There's so much going on when you're in a divine liturgy. And so I said, well, let's just take all of it away and let's see if the story shines through. And I think it becomes more beautiful how the actors worked and how our camera crew worked. And what do you think beauty plays in our faith and in storytelling? We talk about that a lot as Orthodox. You hear a lot of the word beauty, and I would just like to hear what you both think of that.
I'd like you to tackle that first. I need to think about it.
Okay, yeah.
Well, one of the great things about Orthodoxy is that we have a pretty clear understanding of why we go to church, like what are churches and church services even for. It's surprising how rarely Christians ask that question. And a lot of Christians would have a pretty hard time answering it. But I think in Orthodoxy, the answer is very much around the liturgical arts. It's that the church, the temple, its services, it's all an icon of the kingdom of heaven. And the liturgical arts are to make visible that spiritual reality that we are already in the kingdom of heaven. So we paint the communion of saints around us so that we can see that they're there among us worshiping God, that the angels are, up on the ceilings over our head. They're with us worshiping God. The incense is the fragrance of heaven. The reverberant acoustics, makes the choir sound like it's all of the saints and angels singing along with us. And we come to church services because it's a way of acclimating our psyches to that constant presence of the kingdom of heaven being at hand, which is something that we sort of know that abstractly, that Christians are already, citizens of the kingdom of heaven, as it were, and that God is always there with us wherever we are. But it's not easy to feel that or to see that. But when we're in an Orthodox church, fully decorated as they are, with the services conducted in the traditional manner, that presence of the whole church and the presence of God is made manifest to the senses, visually, orally, and that's why we go to church, is so that we can actually experience the presence of the kingdom of heaven rather than just believe in it abstractly. And so there's, and so another interesting paradox emerges, which is that even though Christians seek to practice a certain asceticism, in the church, we practice aesthetic maximalism. And we see this most of all in the monasteries, that Orthodox monasteries, the monks are poor and they live in the most self-denying lifestyle, and yet Orthodox monasteries have more beauty, like physical, artistic beauty, artistic treasures, than almost anywhere in the world. An old world Orthodox monastery is a museum with untold richness of historic artworks made by the monks. And that's a paradox of orthodoxy and monasticism that is, a wonderful treasure. And I loved the presence of the artist monk in the movie, and the contrast of how they lived in extreme visual austerity. Like the house was just a white box. Everybody's cell was a white box. The icon corner was just, a couple of little plain icons hanging in the middle of a huge white wall. It was like a really exaggerated austerity in how you handled the movie set. But then they had this one monk who's just constantly painting beautiful opulent ornament everywhere, painting icons, and they have their little house chapel that's just, it's just ornate, old world Eastern European kind of way, and this monk is just gradually painting more and more of these ornaments, and so it showed in that one house, that beautiful marriage of ascetic austerity and liturgical, maximalist beauty. That's the hallmark of Orthodoxy, quite honestly. I mean, that's, if you made a movie about, Texan Baptists, a lot about the movie could look the same, but that part would not. The chapel and the artist monk painting icons and ornaments, that couldn't have been in a movie about Texas Baptists.
I think one of the dilemmas about the great beauty is that you don't want people to focus on the beauty. The beauty is there to draw you into an encounter with the living God. It's like a personal encounter with anybody you love, and there's an electrical charge to it. And everything is conducive to helping you get there. But if somebody just stops short at, oh, this is lovely, like they're in an art museum, they're not getting it. It's meant to be so beautiful it pierces your heart. I remember I was being interviewed once, and the interviewer said, but all of this, the candles and the icons and the music and all, doesn't that make you feel farther from God? Which was a weird thing to say, but it made sense to her as I think, non-Christian. Like, you have all this elaborate stuff and it's just distracting. And I said, when it's your anniversary and your husband takes you out to dinner and there's a white cloth on the table and you have wine and you have, candles and you have romantic music playing. And I said, does that make you feel farther from your husband? Does that make you feel less romantic? It's when beauty's working right, it enables us to get to a place. And that's what Orthodoxy is. One of the beautiful things is if you're there and you're just not feeling it all because you're mad or something, everybody else around you is doing their best to engage. And it's almost like they pick you up in their arms. When you're crippled, they pick you up and they carry you. You don't have to feel something at every liturgy. Just be there, just show up, and it washes over you, and it's making a difference at some level you're not even aware of. Now, there was one thing I wanted to say to jump off of this, which also would have to do with the monastery, with Dormition Monastery in Point Reyes. No, not Point Reyes, that's California. Anyway, it's in Michigan. So Father Roman Braga was, I think you probably both have heard of him, it's a women's monastery. He was the priest. Wonderful, wise. Somebody, a Romanian, did a long interview with him in Romanian, and it was published in English and has just been republished as Experiencing the Inner Universe. So it's a heck of a book.
Yeah.
But one of the things he and his interviewer are talking about is Americans are so weird, and they don't get this, and they don't do this that we always have done. And Father Roman says, Americans are different. They can't accept the faith. They can't go into that encounter with God unless it goes through their minds first. You have to respect that acculturation about Americans. It has to be rational. They need to understand a rational argument. I bring that up to say that 20 or 30 years later, I don't think that's the case. I think maybe it seemed that way in the 90s. Maybe it even was that way in the 90s. It's an example of a Catholic, a Jesuit, I think he says, monk says to him, how many times do I have to say the Jesus prayer to see the uncreated light? Like, that's just that Western, attitude. Father Roman says, I told him, do not say that prayer anymore.
Oh, wow.
So that extreme headiness that we had in your work, I don't think your work reflects that need for rational argument. Perhaps that's something that has just flowed away from America in the last 20 years or so.
Oh, wow. I love that. Yeah, I mean, I think that the film El Tonto Por Cristo, it's really about surrendering. It's about surrender. You sit in the dark when you watch the movie. You just let it go over you. And that's what I was hoping with this film. Is it's more of a personal interpretation for people to wherever they are, if they're Orthodox or not Orthodox. It's an invitation just to sit back and let the film go over you. I think it maybe have been Jonathan Pageau who was talking about, the cool thing about cinema is it's so ancient that, we used to do that around campfires. You would tell stories with the flickering light. And now we sit in a dark room and there's a flickering screen and the story's told to you. And that's really important for me. I guess maybe we can talk about maybe you both can give a brief description. If you were telling someone, you need to go see this movie, I don't want to give you any spoilers, but here's what I think. Is that a good question? Maybe that's kind of vague. I don't know.
I think that's a good question. You got anything on that already?
Well, like what should people look forward to? Like, why should they see the movie? I mean, I would say it's a story told through vignettes. It's a series of brief little scenes that, gradually give you insights into each of the characters, insights into their past, insights into their moral failings and their moral strengths. The movie doesn't. I wouldn't say there's no plot, but the plot is not exactly linear. primarily a story of artistic vignettes, some of which are kind of obviously symbolic. They kind of illuminate the overall story being told, some of which seem arbitrary or comic, and may or may not mean anything. Maybe you don't figure out what they mean until you're thinking about it much later. It reminds me of the old Andrei Rublev movie that way.
Yeah. I just had the thought that life is a series of vignettes, isn't it? This is how we live every day. We have these little episodes of things that happen to us. And so perhaps it's the most natural way to experience a movie, to go into a story. And it's like these are the things you're remembering from this past week, the things that happened. It does feel very natural, very easy to acclimate yourself to that as you come into the story. Like I said, I was relieved because I was afraid it might be too hard, or I might not even understand it or really, get what I needed to out of it. But it's very accessible, in spite of the fact that it's very beautiful. So people should not let that hold them back. A very beautiful movie, but storytelling is wonderful, very engaging. You come to know the characters, you come to like the characters, and in subtle, not hit them over the head with a hammer, but subtle ways, you become invested in the characters and you care for them. You want them to succeed at whatever it is they're trying to do. And you feel that kindliness to them that the central character, Father John, Abbot John, the kindness he has for each of his spiritual children there. I think you led us into that in a subtle way that was actually much like life is, again, when you're making friends with people and you get to know them bit by bit. It was a very natural movie, I felt like. It was very easy just to walk into it in a natural way, because it did, in all those ways, sort of reflect what daily life is like in the first place.
Yeah, someone who had screened the film, they were like, well, maybe you should change the title because it says The Fool for Christ. And I feel like there were very possible other fools in the film, and I think it was misleading. I was like, well, that's just the fun of cinema, because I'm a really huge fan of Robert Altman, Paul Thomas Anderson, and these are people who, it's a big cast of characters that go in and out. And I've always been intrigued with that. Like, I know someone in my life, and my best friend may not know the other people who I know, and then they come into their life, and it's the weaving of humans in our life, which I love. I find interesting. Yeah, so we're trying to get this. We're working on getting this film into theaters, as y'all know, and I just think that people are hungry for storytelling, and they're hungry for true cinema. And I wonder, like, why do you think there is this surge in people wanting to go to the cinemas, or people wanting to hear original stories? Because it was, there was a while it was like, we had the Marvel movies and you had the sequels, and those still exist. But I've noticed recently a lot of the things that are really hitting in the cinemas have been original, not just IP, like intellectual property. It's been new things. Yeah, I'm just curious on what you think. Is that something that's in America, or is that something global? I don't know.
Boy, I don't feel like I know enough about that to answer. I mean, I want to ask you that now.
Okay, yeah.
I sure do get what you're saying about all the characters coming together, almost like Dickens, and they start overlapping, and you realize one of my, are you hung there? It looks like, okay, looked like we were hung up for a minute. My favorite movies is Robert Altman's Nashville. That's just a heartbreaking movie. Such a beautiful movie. All of those, and I can't watch it with my grandchildren because there's nakedness in it.
Yeah, for sure.
Just, cover up that scene, but what a touching movie that is. Again, it's like real life.
Yeah, I even think
finding the connections we didn't know were there.
Yeah, y'all were talking about Andrei Rublev. There's a lot of stories happening in that film. I think that's one of the beautiful things in the movie is, spoiler alert, at the very end when the kid says, "I'll never make bells again," and Andrei Rublev has taken a vow of silence, and he says, "Oh, but you will, and I will paint." And there's just this, you follow so many stories, and it's almost like the whole entire film was built around that last line, and I find that so intriguing. So who do you hope watches a film like this? I think about this. Is it for Orthodox? Is it for the rest of the world? Is it a peek into Orthodoxy, American Orthodoxy? Is it a peek into Orthodox people who are, telling stories? I was just curious on what you think. Like, who would you like to see this film?
Well, it's going to have to be a nuanced thinker. I think, there's a lot of people in the world are black and white thinkers who want everything to be, morally right and wrong. And people like that probably won't like this movie. This is every single scene is a slightly amusing mixture of, more moral and social ambiguity that people who think in shades of gray and people who generally find, humanity to be a source of joy, will probably really, really enjoy the characters in the movie and their foibles in life. But I can imagine there's a lot of people, including a lot of religious people, who actually won't like it for the same reason that, it's not exactly clear who's good and who's bad in the movie, or what actions on their parts are good or bad. But I love it for that reason. I mean, it's so true to real life. And I mean, what better way to go through real life than just sort of love everybody around you and enjoy them for their faults as well as for their strengths. So yeah, anyone anyone of an artistic temperament surely will understand and enjoy that. In terms of orthodoxy, I mean, obviously Orthodox people will understand the movie best. I think there's a lot of non-Orthodox people who have enough familiarity with Orthodoxy that they would still totally get it. Because we just be, Catholics or Anglicans, for instance, who have a reasonable familiarity with monasticism and Eastern Orthodoxy would have no trouble following it. But yeah, there'll probably be people out there who, whose religious experience just does not overlap with what's going on in the movie and would be completely confused by it, no doubt.
Boy, I look forward to finding out, time will tell, but I'm trying to imagine somebody who would be so offended by this movie that they wouldn't like it. I have trouble imagining that, but I'm afraid probably that does exist. I would love to see people react to this, and I find it kind of hard to predict what the reactions might be. So who should see this movie is everybody. There's no restraints on that at all. I'd love everybody to see this movie and see what it does to them. And there just is so much that is simply likable about it that it would draw people in and do less of that triggering of the black and white. It's easier to avoid triggering the black and white thinking, but when you're telling stories. And in my most recent book, Welcome to the Orthodox Church, I wanted to explain what it would be like to actually live an Orthodox life and go through all the services and all of those things. I found it was so much easier to do if I pretended we had an imaginary church. And I could say, yes, when you walk into this church, this is on the right and that's on the left. And if I was making it just in theory, if I said that this Orthodox church, this is on the right, already people are screaming outside my window because I'm getting it wrong. It's so much easier to root it in a person or an imaginary person and less people accept it better. They go with the flow. And so that's the great advantage of storytelling rather than didacticism.
Mm-hmm. And I do feel like quite possibly with what you both do, when you're setting out to do it, this is from me. So when I was making Tonto Por Cristo, one of the main reasons to make it is it did not exist. And I was making something that I would like to watch, the type of cinema that I would like. And there's nothing to really base it on besides the different things that I do like. And when I made my first film, it was the same way. This World Won't Break. It was, instead of making the film about the country singer who makes it, or about the country singer where he has the fall from grace, what about the film, the country singer who doesn't make it? What does he do at 40 years old? So I do think, do you guys approach your work in that regard at all? Or is that just something that maybe I do? Or is it something, when you're writing something, are you writing it because you wish that there was a book like that, or there was architecture like that, that you could look at or that you could read?
Oh, no, for me, it just kind of bubbles up inside and it feels right. And so I write it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't base it off of anybody else's work.
Mm.
I'm sure that an architect needs to be informed about others' work, for inspiration and also just for safety purposes. For one, you don't want to put up the dome of Hagia Sophia and have it crash. So.
Oh, yes. I'm sure my work's based on everything that's ever come before. And yeah, I mean, to a large extent, I am just designing what I kind of would like to see or have always dreamed of existing, but doesn't quite exist. That's always a balance with the specifics of the project. I mean, certain things have to be done for the project to be a good fit for its program or its place. But it's a balance, Some of my design choices are like, that's a good choice because of the project, and some of my design choices are, I'm going to do it this way because it's coming from my heart, and it's something that I've always thought would be beautiful. And when you hire an artist, you have to allow those things to be in balance.
Yes, 100%. Yes, I feel that every day. It's being balanced is probably the hardest, because sometimes you want to go to extremes, and sometimes you just want to tuck away and not write anything or build anything or create. There's times that I say that. I'm saying, I think somebody once said, they were like, "Oh, I wish I was creative like you," and I was like, "Oh, you don't. You really don't." Because there's no on and off switch. It's just constantly. And the way that I write and the way I do voice memos sometimes. So I'm doing character voices. If someone ever got a hold of my phone, they would probably put me in a hospital because of all the voices that I have in my head. Well, I just want to say thank you all so much for, first of all, watching the film and thank you for the great feedback. Is there anything before we leave that you would like to say to the audience that is anticipating this film coming out?
I just want to say you're going to enjoy it. You might have a kind of heavy sense about this is an important movie or powerful and all that, and it is all of that, but you will enjoy it as well. It's easy access, easy on-ramp, and then you're just along for the ride. Yeah,
I agree with that. And and I also want to add, not only is it enjoyable and funny, but I think it's culturally important. It shows a vision of what it would look like if America were Orthodox. Full stop.
Yes.
And that's something I work towards in my design work, what that might look like, but I can only do it in buildings and furniture, which is only a little piece of culture. But you've done it with people. You've taken actors and you've given them a script and coaching that allows them to express what it would look like if they were completely Texan and completely Orthodox and kept those two things in unself-conscious balance. And to me, that was an amazing thing to behold.
Yes.
Well, yes, thank you for those kind words. I'm very excited for people to get a chance to watch this thing in cinemas, and also for people to dive into what y'all do, the beautiful things and creations and work that y'all do, which is, I'm a big fan of those things. So thank you for hanging out with me this Sunday, and I hope to talk to both of y'all very soon.
Thanks so much, Josh.
Thanks very much.
All right.